Good evening, I'm Jeff Bennett. Amna Nawaz is away. On the NewsHour tonight, California sues the Trump administration for deploying the National Guard as protests against immigration raids turn violent. A look at how the Trump administration is filling critical roles with people with alleged extremist ties.
The message is that loyalty trumps expertise, loyalty trumps serious policy, it trumps national security.
And Broadway celebrates a banner year for theater at its annual Tony Awards.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Leonard and Norma Chlorfine, and the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation.
Two retiring executives turn their focus to greyhounds, giving these former race dogs a real chance to win. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your purpose, and the way you give back. Life well planned.
The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. And with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. Protests against immigration raids in Los Angeles entered their fourth day after a chaotic weekend. President Trump deployed the National Guard to put down demonstrations over the objections of state and local officials. And late today, 700 active-duty U.S. Marines have also been deployed. They're expected to arrive in the next 24 hours. Law enforcement has made dozens of arrests, and the events are sparking a debate about state versus federal authority. Lisa Desjardins starts our coverage.
Today, in parts of Los Angeles, cleanup, a forced calm, and in one part, a crowd of protesters outside the facility holding union leader David Huerta, charged with obstructing police during an ICE raid last week. This after a tumultuous weekend when thousands of people flooded the downtown. Some blocked off a major highway, set fire to driverless cars, and threw rocks at police officers, while police responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, flashbangs, and arrests. LA police have declared all of downtown an unlawful assembly area, and the debate over the response rages.
Some of the things you're reading about in Los Angeles, thank goodness we sent out some wonderful National Guard.
At the White House today, Trump pointed without proof at what he called paid agitators and insurrectionists. And multiple outlets report Trump is going further, temporarily deploying active duty troops, Marines, to Los Angeles without invoking the Insurrection Act that other presidents have cited for such a rare move. That would be an unprecedented step. As a result, California's Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom faces two tests, protecting his largest city from upheaval and confronting Trump. Today, California sued the president, calling the National Guard order unconstitutional and immoral. Trump has said he is open to arresting Newsom. Last night, the governor responded.
Come after me, arrest me. Let's just get it over with.
For his part, President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, said there's no plan to arrest Newsom. He defended federal actions.
The men and women at ICE, the men and women at the Border Patrol made LA safer that day, but you're not hearing any of this. All you hear is a rhetoric about ICE being racist, about ICE being Nazis and terrorists, and Governor Newsom feeds that.
This all was sparked Friday after a series of immigration raids by federal agents clad in camouflage as part of President Trump's mass deportation campaign. Protesters surrounded a federal detention facility in downtown LA where police clashed with them. On Saturday, more protests erupted in LA, spreading to the towns of Paramount and Compton amid reports of immigration raids there. That was the day Trump ordered the National Guard deployment. Also Saturday, the FBI said an officer was hit by a rock. They are still searching for the suspect. At the same time, video showed vast groups of nonviolent protesters, some practicing civil disobedience, like these Sunday afternoon, who marched onto a portion of the highway stopping traffic.
This is us saying you can't do this. We won't let you separate children from their families, and we're gonna fight back.
Police in LA eventually forced protesters off the highway, but things were no longer peaceful. Driverless cars set aflame, and people threw rocks at patrol cars. Officers took shelter underneath an overpass. Others in the crowd also shot fireworks. Police fired flashbangs. Last night, LA Police Chief Jim McDonnell condemned the violence.
This violence that I've seen is disgusting. It's escalated now since the beginning of this incident. What we saw the first night was bad. What we've seen subsequent to that is getting increasingly worse and more violent. Tonight we had individuals out there shooting commercial-grade fireworks at our officers. That can kill you.
Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass blamed President Trump for escalating the situation.
What we're seeing in LA is chaos caused by the administration. People should exercise their right to protest. That's their First Amendment right. But people should also exercise that right peacefully. We do not want to play into the administration's hands.
Trump's National Guard order means Newsom cannot use the troops for law enforcement. Rachel Van Landingham is a retired Air Force officer and former chief of international law at U.S. Central Command. She says this is unprecedented.
We've had the president federalize National Guard troops before and put them under the command and control of the president. But typically it's been done at the request of governors. Governors normally command their own National Guard troops.
In all, more than 1,000 National Guard members are deployed in Los Angeles so far. Van Landingham says the law here favors the president.
The bigger legal basis of the statute, I think, is clearly within the president's discretion, except for the context of it being the orders did not flow through the governor.
In the meantime, federal officials say they have no plans to stop immigration raids in the Los Angeles area this week, with the National Guard standing by. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
For a closer look, we're joined now by Juliette Kayyem, a former assistant secretary at the Department of Homeland Security. She's now at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Juliette, it's great to have you here. So historically, presidents, as we just heard, they federalized the National Guard at a governor's request during a time of crises, like after Hurricane Katrina, or to enforce court orders, as was the case in Little Rock back in 1957, to enforce integration. What happened over the weekend is without precedent. The president deploying the Guard over the governor's objection. What are the implications?
Well, they are huge. I mean, there's not only no precedent to this, there's no sort of check on it. We don't know if this is the standard, if what happened in LA is the standard now for federalizing the National Guard and deployment of active military. The Trump administration has so lowered the floor and the distinction between civil and military actions that they appear now to be one and the same. It's important to remember there's two distinct issues here, and I'm not even going to talk about immigration. The first is, what are the standards for deployment of a federalized National Guard? To just put it in context, the last time this was done, as you said, in both instances, the governors wanted it, was 1992, the LA riots. By the time that they were called, over 60 people had been killed in a city that was literally on fire everywhere throughout Los Angeles. And then again in 2005 with Hurricane Katrina response. By then, 1,400 Americans were dead. There is protest. There is violent protest in LA. There are cars on fire. There's name calling. There's agitation. But there is nothing that satisfies the standards that we saw in 92 and 2005. The second thing I want to say is the deployment of active military into a very complicated web of first responders who are training and working together all the time is not always beneficial. And there's a lot of challenges in terms of the introduction of a militarized force into a civilian law enforcement, firefighters, emergency managers. And in the past, it has not worked very well.
I want to ask you more about the Marine deployment in a moment. But first, for the National Guard, practically, does the National Guard operate differently, whether it's under state or federal leadership? I mean, what does that mean for command and control?
Yeah, so the National Guard is, just think of it as dual-hatted. So the same person. I'm in the National Guard. So under state National Guard, I report to my governor. The president, as he did on Saturday, then could federalize me essentially under Title X. I now report to any command that president is going to give me, regardless of what I've been trained to, my understanding of the community, my integration into the community. That's the beauty of state National Guards, is that they're us. I mean, they're here. They're not off at some camp in another state. They understand the communities. They understand the geography. So, for example, in 1992 with the LA riots, the state National Guard were also deployed. That was viewed as pretty successful, although delayed and complicated. They did things like help with traffic control, protect buildings, as we're talking about, support law enforcement in terms of just giving them sort of a little bit of bandwidth, given where the riots were. They help protect shopping malls. That's the kind of thing that you want your sort of your local military asset to do. Under the president, they can do almost anything under Title X, except under the Posse Comitatus Act. They cannot serve in a law enforcement function. In other words, ICE would still need to come in and deport people. But unless you've trained for that, unless you know what the rules of engagement are, I wouldn't have a lot of confidence in the military understanding that distinction under this president.
Well, late today, we learned that 700 Marines in California from the 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines at 29 Palms, they've been ordered to assist in Los Angeles. They're expected to arrive within 24 hours. The big question now, among many, is whether President Trump will invoke the Insurrection Act, which would give these troops the ability to directly participate in civil law enforcement. And this was the thing, Juliet, as you well know, that many Trump officials during the first term were pushing back against, because it sets up potentially volatile interactions between U.S. troops and civilians on U.S. soil. What questions does this raise? They also U.S. troops against first responders. I mean, look, if people want to complain about the rioters or the paid rioters or the outside agitators, sure, we will now have active military on the streets with a mission we don't know, under legal authority that has not yet been invoked yet, with no training, no communication capacity with the other first responders, and no clear chain of command that integrates into what's already been built. And I want to say this again, and out in the street, operationally not necessary. I mean, we're not at the kind of crisis that the president and Secretary Hegseth and Homan, who talked about sort of essentially mean language towards ICE officials. So this is a second shoe to drop within 48 hours. And I will say we have never seen this before. I don't care what you think about immigration or immigration enforcement. This is a different play, and the floor has fallen if President Trump does this. Juliette Kayyem, thank you for your time and for your perspectives this evening. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
And now we get two perspectives, starting with Democratic Congresswoman Norma Torres, who represents part of Southern California. I spoke with her earlier today. Congresswoman Torres, thank you for being with us. What specifically triggered the wave of public outrage that has led to days of protests, in some places riots? What has been building up?
What has been building up is the fact that Donald Trump has sent ICE agents armed to the teeth with face coverings in unmarked vehicles, raiding communities indiscriminately, targeting Latinos, arresting them, and failing to provide due process, not carrying warrants. And when members of Congress like myself have presented ourselves at the ICE holding locations, they have refused to allow us to come in. They have refused to brief us on what their actions have been, how many officers have been involved, local officers, and how many injuries have we had, and to really have any oversight over what they are doing. Look, I have visited that location in the past. The max capacity for that location is 100 people. And we are receiving reports that there were probably close to 1,000 people being detained during the time that we were there. So that makes sense to me that they refused us entry because they did not want us to see the conditions that these humans were being held in.
Now, ICE says it's targeting people with final deportation orders, people who have exhausted the range of legal options available to them. Some 1.5 million undocumented immigrants fall into that category in this country. If we're a nation of laws, why shouldn't federal agents enforce those court orders?
If that was true, they would come in with a warrant. If that was true, they would have an actual name, and they would be asking people for their identification. They would not be breaking car windows, and they would not be raiding places of employment, school graduations, or standing in front of elementary schools demanding to be allowed in to arrest children.
We have witnessed some disturbing scenes, protesters throwing rocks at police, setting off commercial-grade fireworks near law enforcement, even torching self-driving cars. So far as you know, who are these rioters? Are they part of the broader protest movement or something more fringe and opportunistic?
They are not part of the movement that has been a peaceful movement of immigrants and their neighbors, their supporters, trying to have their voices heard. The city of Los Angeles is very diverse, with many groups with many different agendas. And the people that understand these groups best are the local police department, the LAPD, and the local leaders. That is why we cannot get ahead of them, and that is why we need to allow them the time to have to exercise oversight over what is happening and take control of the situation. But this cannot happen while ICE continues to unleash this terror on our communities.
Lastly, Congresswoman, you're facing some criticism from conservatives for the social media post where you called out ICE agents.
ICE get the out of LA so that order can be restored.
Does language like that coming from a sitting member of Congress, does that risk escalating tensions at this already volatile moment?
Absolutely not. Any more than language like just grab them by the P word. Guess what, America? We have become the P word.
Congresswoman Norma Torres, thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you. Nice talking to you, Jeff.
And for another view, we turn now to Catherine Barger, chairwoman of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. She's a Republican who represents LA's 5th district. That's the county's largest. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
So President Trump's move to federalize the National Guard, we've now got 700 U.S. Marines who are on standby. This represents a use of federal military authority not seen in some 6 decades. Do you believe that this was a justified move to restore order?
Well, early on, in my understanding is the reason why the president and Holman brought in the National Guard was because they felt that the ICE agents were not being protected. And clearly there were issues early on. This is law enforcement. These are all people that have taken an oath to protect, in the case of LAPD, protect the public, but also protect their fellow officers. And that was why initially it went on. Listen, this is truly getting out of control as it relates to the finger pointing and all that. The bottom line is there's no coordination. And that's my frustration, is that there's no communication between the state and the federal government, because the state has a law that they cannot work with ICE. This is what happens when you don't communicate.
Well, how do you define that boundary between federal power and state sovereignty in the context of immigration?
Well, listen, I'm all for state sovereignty, and I feel the governor's frustration by bringing in the National Guard, who are not coordinating with local officials. There has to be coordination. Otherwise, you get chaos. And that's what we saw last night, which is totally unacceptable. And I respectfully disagree with all the leaders that think that using profanity and flaming the fires is going to help the situation. We as public officials need to stand tall, recognize that peaceful protest is allowed and actually should be done. But when it escalates to where it did last night, it's crossed the line. When I see the graffiti that is on the state buildings and the profanity and the kill the police. Meanwhile, I've got a sheriff's deputy that was shot over the weekend up in the Antelope Valley who's sitting in a hospital. This is absolutely unacceptable to take on law enforcement in this way and not have their backs, including ICE.
Yeah. Do you find the way that ICE is conducting these immigration raids, using unmarked vehicles, wearing full face masks, in some cases not carrying warrants, not providing due process to the people who are detained, is that an appropriate way to enforce federal immigration law?
So, we need to flush out the facts because I am told that, in fact, they did have warrants. And so I think it's important for us all to get the facts. And that's where transparency comes into play. Because obviously, I don't condone going on into a school under the guise of checking to round up children. I think that's totally inappropriate. But at the same time, I'm being told that, in fact, ICE did have warrants and we're going in specifically for individuals that, quite frankly, don't belong in this country.
Where does LA County head next after all this, in your view?
Well, LA County, we are the umbrella with we have 88 cities under our jurisdiction. LA City is one of them. Obviously, Mayor Bass is very, very, very involved in this, working with the governor. We have our Office of Emergency Management that stands ready to assist in any way possible. There's mutual aid taking place between the sheriff and LAPD. I'm hoping that people can take a step back, stop tweeting, and actually pick up the phone, talk. You can agree to disagree, but at the end of the day, what's happening on our streets is totally unacceptable. And these are anarchists. These are not peaceful protesters. These are people that are taking advantage of the situation, looting downtown, looting businesses that, quite frankly, are literally just trying to get by each day. And I find it highly, highly, highly inappropriate. And as a local leader, I'm not going to buy into all this rhetoric. I will work with the feds and I will work with the state, but I recognize there are some of the issues that the state's put into play that have basically put us in the situation, including laws that do not allow us to work with the federal government, with ICE, which to me is a disservice to the men and women that work for ICE, because it's putting them in a situation of what you're seeing. They have to mask themselves because there's people that are doxing them. And I find it fascinating that we talk about the ICE that are masked, but no one talks about the protesters.
Kathryn Barger, Chairwoman of the Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time this evening.
Thank you.
And we should mention that we asked for interviews with the Trump administration's border czar, Tom Homan, and the U.S. Attorney for Central California, that includes Los Angeles County. Our requests for interviews were turned down. We start the day's other headlines in the Middle East. An aid boat headed for Gaza has arrived in Israel after Israeli forces boarded that vessel and detained the activists on board, including climate advocate Greta Thunberg.
Added to the long list of war crimes that Israel has been committing.
We are being intercepted right now.
Israel's action was part of its long-standing blockade of the Palestinian territory. A legal rights group says the activists are expected to be held at a detention facility until they are deported. Israel's foreign ministry dismissed the voyage on social media, calling it the selfie yacht of celebrities, and said it would distribute the boat's aid through established channels. Meantime, in Gaza, Palestinian health officials say gunfire killed 14 people as they were heading to an aid center. Witnesses say the gunmen appeared to be allied with the Israeli military. It's the latest in a series of shootings that have killed more than 100 people since the rollout of new food distribution locations last month.
They open aid sites for people and then they kill them there. We don't want aid. We don't want anything. We'd rather be killed and be done with this whole thing. We are fed up with this life. He was not there to resist or to launch missiles. He went to get flour.
Israel's military has not commented on the latest shooting. The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which runs the sites, says there has been no violence in or near the aid distribution centers themselves. Ukraine says that Russia launched nearly 500 drones and missiles overnight, the biggest such attack in their 3-year war. The Ukrainian Air Force claims to have shot down more than half of the drones and says only a handful reached their targets. Russia has intensified its strikes since Ukraine's surprise drone attack on Russian air bases earlier this month. Elsewhere, Russia and Ukraine carried out the first stage of their latest prisoner swap. It was agreed to during talks in Istanbul last week, but otherwise failed to produce any progress toward a ceasefire. Delegations from the U.S. and China are meeting in London to try to resolve their ongoing trade dispute. U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent met with China's vice premier in the first of what could be 2 days of talks. They were joined by U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, and their Chinese counterparts. The negotiations at London's Lancaster House come after the world's 2 biggest economies agreed to a 90-day suspension of many of the highest tariffs last month. But still, new data shows that China's exports to the U.S. fell by 35% in May from a year earlier. President Trump's new travel ban barring citizens of a dozen countries from entering the U.S. took effect this morning. The order restricts nationals from 12 mainly African and Middle Eastern countries from entering the country and adds partial travel restrictions on people from 7 other countries who don't hold a valid visa. There were no major delays reported at the nation's airports today as a result of the ban, nor any significant protests. That's unlike when Mr. Trump instituted a similar ban during his first term that barred travelers from 7 Muslim-majority countries, which resulted in chaos and protests at several airports. Dozens of scientists at the National Institutes of Health issued a rare public criticism of the Trump administration's public health policies today. In a 4-page letter, around 90 staffers wrote, quote, "We dissent to administration policies that undermine the NIH mission, waste public resources, and harm the health of Americans and people across the globe." The letter was addressed to NIH Director Jay Bhattacharya and addresses the termination of some 2,100 research grants worth more than $12 billion. In response, Bhattacharya said the letter contained what he called some fundamental misconceptions about the direction of the agency. Separately, Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. said today he's removing every member of a scientific panel that advises the CDC on how to use vaccines. He's pledging to replace them with his own selections. Kennedy recently changed CDC recommendations for COVID-19 shots without consulting the 17-member panel. Warner Brothers Discovery is splitting into 2 companies as it tries to adjust to how people consume TV and movies. One side will focus on streaming, with HBO, HBO Max, Warner Brothers Television, and Movies, plus DC Studios falling under one umbrella. The other company will focus on cable and will include CNN, Discovery, TNT Sports in the U.S., plus digital products like Bleacher Report. Today's announcement follows a similar move by Comcast, which said last November that it plans to spin off its cable networks, including MSNBC, into a separate publicly traded company. A judge in New York dismissed a $400 million lawsuit today from actor and director Justin Baldoni against actress Blake Lively. It's the latest development in a long-running legal feud stemming from their film It Ends With Us. Lively sued Baldoni last December for sexual harassment and retaliation. He then sued her and her husband, Ryan Reynolds, for defamation and extortion. The judge said today that Baldoni couldn't sue Lively for defamation because allegations made in a lawsuit are exempt from libel. Lively's sexual harassment lawsuit against Baldoni is ongoing. On Wall Street today, stocks ended little changed as traders looked for clues from those U.S.-China trade talks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost just a single point, so basically flat. The Nasdaq added around 60 points on the day. The S&P 500 also ended virtually unchanged. And a passing of note, funk legend Sly Stone of Sly and the Family Stone has died. He was the creative powerhouse behind hits like Everyday People and one of the most prominent musicians of the 1960s and early 70s. As a singer, songwriter, and producer who played multiple instruments, Stone drove the band's unique sound, which covered everything from dance tracks to unifying anthems. Their music influenced generations of funk, soul, and rock musicians and fans. His family says Stone died after a battle with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, or COPD. Sly Stone was 82 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, Tamara Keith and Amy Walter break down the latest political headlines. And comedian Sarah Silverman gives her brief but spectacular take on grief and humor.
This is the PBS NewsHour from the David M. Rubenstein Studio at WETA in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
The first few months of President Trump's second term, including some selections for key jobs in his administration, have sparked new questions about his complicated history with elevating extremist views. Our White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez takes a closer look.
President Trump has a long history of amplifying messages and figures embraced by white supremacists and other domestic extremists. From spreading birther conspiracy theories about former President Obama's citizenship, to lying about the outcome of the 2020 election, to pardoning the rioters who violently stormed the Capitol in 2021. Now, in his second term, he's doubled down, staffing key positions with people who have spread racist conspiracies and defended January 6 insurrectionists who assaulted police. Joining me now to discuss is Jacob Ware. He's a research fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations studying domestic terrorism and counterterrorism. Jacob, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Let's start with how the president's second term compares to his first term, specifically when it comes to who he is elevating in his administration and the ideological views that they promote and they're known for. How would you compare the two terms?
Well, I think we had an expression during the first term. We said there were adults in the room, serious long-term professionals in national security and other fields who staffed the administration and who kept the trains on the tracks. This time, there are far fewer of those individuals, and I think that's encapsulated actually in the January 6th legacy, where this time President Trump basically has surrounded himself with people who either believe or are willing to lie to him in saying that the January 6th election riot was legitimate, was legal, and that the election was stolen. So immediately you have people who cannot look at a truth and see it for what it is, that he lost that election.
President Trump has come under criticism for appointing several people who have shared extremist views. Those include Ed Martin, the president's pardon attorney, who previously defended January 6 rioters and praised a Nazi sympathizer. Paul Ingrassia, a former podcast host with a history of racist comments, who also said that January 6 should be a national holiday. He's going to now lead the Office of Special Counsel. What message does it send that the administration is further embracing people who have ties to or who have spread extremist views?
I think the message is that loyalty trumps expertise, loyalty trumps serious policy, it trumps national security. It's more important for somebody to be loyal to Trump, loyal to the MAGA doctrine, than to be a serious professional who's going to implement and make hard choices in our national security space. Of course, one of the individuals you mentioned, according to your reporting, Laura, Paul Ingrassia, has said that descendants of slaves should be paying slave owners reparations. I mean, that is an overtly racist statement, and this is somebody who's leading the Office of Special Counsel.
The president has also embraced figures and symbols that perpetuate anti-Semitism in some cases, including he posted a meme on social media recently that features Pepe the Frog, a symbol of white supremacist movements, and the president previously dined with white supremacist Nick Fuentes, and his Bedminster club hosted Timothy Hale Cusinelli, who prosecutors called a Nazi sympathizer and who has a history of anti-Semitic rants. The president says that his attacks on universities, that his restrictions that he's placing on universities like Harvard are in the name of combating anti-Semitism. But does this track record show the opposite?
Well, actually, Laura, this is something that does go back to the first administration. The place where we saw this rapprochement between Trump and the violent far right. The first time we saw that was at Charlottesville, where a white supremacist attack happened on behalf of an overtly neo-Nazi cause with people who were there as overt neo-Nazis. And he, of course, said there were very fine people on both sides. Years later, he told the Proud Boys during a presidential debate to stand back and stand by. So President Trump has repeatedly, during his time in office, appealed to not just people who have what you might call far-right ideology or views, but even people who are willing to act out in violence on behalf of those views. What is less clear to me is whether President Trump shares these memes, these ideas deliberately, whether it's a dog whistle, whether it's unknown. But either way, It's clearly a message being sent to the far right, whether overt or covert, that they have a defender in the White House.
Trump's pardon attorney, Ed Martin, is now weighing whether or not to pardon Stewart Rhodes, who is the founder of the far-right militia group Oath Keepers. Rhodes was convicted of seditious conspiracy after the January 6th attack at the Capitol. And Martin has also recently suggested that he's looking to pardon the men convicted of plotting to kidnap Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer.
On the pardon front, we can't leave these guys behind. In my opinion, these are victims just like January 6th. And so we are processing that. And, I have complete confidence that we're going to get a hard look at it. And the president will want to know the facts about it, want to see the relationship.
You talked about signals being sent from this White House. What signal does it send?
Well, the weaponization of the pardon power, the abuse of the pardon power, I think is one of the great concerns of this administration so far. Because again, it's not just symbolizing that these ideologies are welcome. The January 6th defendants and the Gretchen Whitmer plot defendants, they were not prosecuted for their ideologies. They were prosecuted for violent plots that were either planned or carried out. So again, the message is not necessarily that your ideologies, your hatred of the Democratic Party or of government is legitimized. It's that violence on behalf of those ideologies is legal. The historical record, I fear, is not going to say that January 6th was a terrorist attack or an insurgency, an insurrection, a coup d'etat, whatever word you would want to use, against the American government. It will recognize that attack, as that incident, as a patriotic protest on behalf of a stolen election. And that is the legacy. We are watching January 6th, we're watching the 2020 election be rewritten in real time.
Jacob Ware, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
President Trump's deployment of the National Guard in Los Angeles has sparked a political showdown between Democrats and his administration. On that and more, we turn now to our Politics Monday duo. That's Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter and Tamara Keith of NPR. It's great to see you both.
Hello. Good to be back.
So let's start with what's happening in Los Angeles with the deployment of the National Guard, the federalizing of those troops, and then add to that the roughly 700 U.S. Marines who've been deployed. They're now on standby. Tam, this is clearly a fight that Donald Trump wants. What is his strategy in escalating the response?
Yeah, President Trump, if you go back to his first term in office, he wanted to use the military, use force against protesters. He sees the violent imagery, he sees it on television, and his reaction is to want to send in the military. You know, back in 2020, he said, quote, "If the looting starts, the shooting starts." There were, that was in Minnesota that he was referring to, but there were also protests that turned violent in California back then. Now he's saying, if they spit, we will hit. He seems to have a rhyme for every occasion, and he's into this. He wants this fight. He wants this fight with the state of California. Even before this happened over the weekend, late last week, he was talking about wanting to take funding away from California, urging his departments to find ways to take funds from California. California's governor was pointing out that California pays more in taxes than it receives in federal services. This was a fight that's been brewing, and now it is at a whole nother level.
And it's worth mentioning the protests in some places did turn violent.
Absolutely.
The chief of the LAPD at one point said he wasn't entirely sure. Maybe they did need more help. Maybe they did need more National Guard resources. But on this point of President Trump, Amy, using the military to paint this perception of toughness and to send a signal to other Democratic-led states and cities. What do you make of it?
No, I think that's true. And I do think that's why it's been so interesting to watch the Democratic response, especially of Democratic leaders, not just in the state, but nationally. To Tam's point about this is a fight that Donald Trump wants, Democrats know that too. They can see the poll numbers. They remember 2020, they remember 2024, and when it comes to issues like this, whether it's crime, whether it is and now, today, on the issue of immigration, Donald Trump has the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't have on a lot of other issues. So this is a fight that he wants to have. What Democrats are saying is, let's not give him more fuel to keep this fight going. You see the mayor of Los Angeles, Gavin Newsom, others saying, please, if you want to protest, that's great. Don't turn it violent. Don't allow this to turn into something that
benefits Donald Trump, the scenes of chaos and police in the streets. The question going forward, I think, is how Democrats do talk about these issues is going to be really important for not just what's happening today in Los Angeles, but just writ large. I think there has been a lot of pullback and a lot of hand-wringing from Democrats about an issue which they used to have an advantage on during Trump's first term. They have a disadvantage on now. This issue isn't going away. And how Democrats respond to whether this is going to happen in other states, how they address concerns about safety and security, that is going to be critical just for forever long.
Yeah, well, the risk for Democrats, what are the risks for President Trump? Immigration, as you both said, his number one issue. It's number one in terms of that's the one that he cares the most about, but it's also the one from which he derives his best approval numbers. Yeah. The risks of overreach.
Yeah, I think that there definitely is a risk of overreach. There's also a risk of the Trump administration looking like they are desperately trying to boost their numbers because they haven't been able to have the sort of sweeping mass deportations that they promised coming into office. So part of this is about trying to visibly keep that promise while also picking a fight with California. One thing I will note is that in California itself, the population of California, 73% of adults in a Public Policy Institute of California survey from February of this year said that that there should be a way for undocumented immigrants to stay in the country legally. A vast majority say that immigrants benefit California. So in terms of the population of the state, his view is not popular in the state, but that also sort of heightens the fight, which is what he wants.
In the time that remains, let's talk about the infighting within the Democratic National Committee, because Politico reported that the current DNC chair, the new DNC chair, Ken Martin, just months into the job, he privately told Democratic leaders that his new vice chair, David Hogg, you see him there, is making it hard to lead the party. And Hogg has vowed to spend millions of dollars in safe blue primaries to oust incumbent Democrats that he views as ineffective. Now, you can say most people aren't really paying attention to what's happening within the DNC right now, but the DNC, in my view, plays a more central role when the party lacks a clear unifying leader. So what's all this mean, and what's it mean for the party?
Yeah, there's this quote from Ken Martin that I saw where he says he took this job to fight Republicans, not Democrats. But right now, Democrats are fighting with each other in terms of the DNC and this leadership fight. There is a decision being made about whether they should take a revote on who on this position that Hogg is in currently. There used to be a commandment in politics that you don't go after incumbents from your own party. Hogg's view is not that. And also, David Hogg is remarkably good at getting attention. Ken Martin, that is not his greatest skill set, is getting attention.
Amy?
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the broader conversation that Democrats are having about who do we want to be going forward. David Hogg represents the younger generation that has felt incredibly frustrated with Democratic politicians, really going all the way back to 2016 when young voters said, we want Bernie Sanders. They've actually said that in 3 successive elections. So this is a fight actually Democrats should welcome having right now, because 2028 is when they should want the team to be on the same page. If you're going to get there, you got to have the disagreements, whether it's in the DNC, but it's certainly going to be happening within primaries and just more broadly within conversations with the Democratic Party leadership.
So get it out of the way in June 2025. Right. Don't let this be happening in October.
In June of 2028.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, they may or may not be able to control that for themselves.
We shall see. Amy Walter and Tamara Keith, thanks to you both.
You're welcome.
Broadway hit a record-breaking box office haul of nearly $2 billion this season, driven by renewed interest in The Great White Way and boosted by star-studded shows. At the Tony Awards last night, there was a call to celebrate acting on big stages and small. Senior arts correspondent Jeffrey Brown peeks behind the curtain for our arts and culture series, Canvas.
Alexander Hamilton, Hamilton, just you wait.
There was a reminder of past glory, a 10-year anniversary reunion of the cast of Hamilton.
Even amid awareness that more recent years, with declining ticket sales and pandemic shutdowns, haven't been so good. Yet last night, the 78th Annual Tony Awards celebrated the highest-grossing Broadway season in recorded history. Cynthia Erivo hosted for the first time, and the night included stars from the stage and screen alike.
Your little light changed me.
One of the top prizes, Best Musical, went to Maybe Happy Ending, a touching story about two aging robots, why not, rediscovering love. It swept 6 awards, including Best Score and Best Actor in a Musical for Darren Criss.
I encourage everyone to please support their local theaters.
Brandon Jacobs Jenkins' Purpose, already a Pulitzer Prize winner, garnered the Tony for Best Play.
A lot of great stuff happens in New York, but a lot more happens out in the regions.
We touch.
Among other winners, Nicole Scherzinger took home Best Actress in a Musical for her powerhouse role in Sunset Boulevard, which also won Best Revival. Veteran actor Francis Jew celebrated his win for Best Featured Actor in the play Yellowface.
To those who don't feel seen, to those who are being targeted in these authoritarian times, I see you.
And in a groundbreaking moment, Cole Escola became the first openly non-binary actor to win Best Actor in a Play for the outrageous offbeat comedy Oh Mary, which Escola also wrote. All in all, a season marked by fresh voices and record-breaking numbers. And joining me now is Frank Dolella. He's host of On Stage for Spectrum News New York One. Thanks for joining us. So, it's not that long ago that all of us were reporting on Broadway's problems amid the pandemic and right afterwards. So, is Broadway back?
Broadway is absolutely back. Cynthia talked about this last night during the Tonys, during her performance and her presentation. This season alone, there were so many stars. There was a diverse collection of shows on Broadway. I've been covering this industry for over 2 decades now. Never have I seen a season like this. I mean, we're talking major Hollywood A-listers like George Clooney, Jake Gyllenhaal, Denzel Washington, Sadie Sink, Kieran Culkin. That's just the Hollywood folks, not to mention the Broadway folks like Audra McDonald, Idina Menzel, Sutton Foster, Lea Salonga, Brenda Peters. We're finally past the hump pre-COVID, so the numbers are looking good, and Broadway certainly feels like it's back.
But then how much of that relies on those big stars that you just mentioned and the really big ticket prices now? How much is Broadway dependent on that continuing?
Yes, the answer is yes, that these stars are coming to Broadway and these ticket prices are pretty high. For George Clooney's show in Othello, which had Denzel Washington, Jake Gyllenhaal, the ticket range was anywhere from like $600 to $900. But I always say, having these folks shine a spotlight on Broadway, if you can't get into those shows because these shows were selling out, it may make you say, you know what, I'm here, I'm going to go see something else, and you can get something at a much cheaper rate. And the stars are going to continue to come to Broadway just from stuff that we're seeing for next season, and that is a very good thing for Broadway.
So last night, Maybe Happy Ending won Best New Musical, Purpose won Best New Play. Tell us briefly about those.
Maybe Happy Ending, the robot love musical. I was doing some interviews with the folks from Maybe Happy Ending, Darren Criss and Helen J. Shen, Michael Arden, who directed it. And back in the fall, before they even started previews, there was a big question mark on whether or not this show was going to actually open. But guess what? It opened back in the fall. It got rave reviews from the critics, and it's the little show that could and is doing. And Purpose, this story, which is very much in the spirit of August Osage County, if you remember that play from years ago, it centers around a family, a civil rights family, and they're all meeting at a dinner table, if you will, and things fly, sparks fly. It's a fabulous play, just picked up the Pulitzer Prize for drama, and Brandon Jacobs Jenkins wrote the play. He won last year for his play Appropriate in the Best Revival of a Play category. This year, he wins for Best New Play for this brand new play, Purpose.
So were there a couple of other winners or moments from last night that struck you?
For me personally, watching Nicole Scherzinger go on this incredible journey with Sunset Boulevard, which picked up Best Revival of a Musical. Nicole won Best Leading Actress in a Musical. I saw this reimagined production of Andrew Lloyd Webber's show back in London 2 years ago, and it was supposed to just be a limited run over in London. Well, her reviews were amazing. It's sold out there, so they brought it across the pond, and it's been doing big numbers, big business at the box office, and she was awarded that Best Lead Actress in a Musical Tony. Now, she was up against Audra McDonald and Megan Hilty and Jennifer Smart from Death Becomes Her, Audra for Gypsy, and Jasmine Amy Rogers for Boop. So that was a stacked category and a very competitive category.
All right, Frank Delella on Broadway and last night's Tonys. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Sarah Silverman is known as one of the sharpest, most fearless voices in comedy, pushing the art form in many new directions. In her new Netflix special out now called Postmortem, she talks about losing her father and stepmother just days apart. Tonight, she shares her brief but spectacular take on the synergy between humor and grief.
My dad was the funniest in the family. Donald Schleppy Silverman, everybody called him Schleppy. And he owned a discount ladies' clothing store called Crazy Sophie's Factory Outlet. Well, my dad did his own radio ads, and they were terrible. At the end, he'd say, "So if you care enough to buy the very best, but you're too cheap, come to Crazy Sophie's." You gonna hold for this plane? I'm in show business, I know how it works. Holding for the plane? He made me the funniest because he taught me a bunch of swear words and stuff. He was that dad. My mother, she was Diane Chambers from Cheers. She said when and where and was very passionate about diction and grammar. My stepmom, Janice, she called herself a wicked stepmother. Janice was, nails and makeup and hair and outfits. So she'd be like, "Did you talk to that boy Jeff from 3 weeks ago you told me in your history class?" And they were both wonderful. They actually loved each other very much. When my mother died about 9 years ago, she was holding Janice's hand. So life is long if you let it. My special's called Postmortem. The most surface meaning, just literally after the death of my parents. My dad and my stepmom died 9 days apart last May. So the stand-up I did was about them dying. I was lucky. I actually adored my parents. They came over every Sunday. It was my favorite day of the week. My stepmom, Janice, had passed away and my dad was going and we were taking care of him at home. He was not afraid of death at all. I asked him if he was scared to die and he said, "Not at all. I don't remember before I was born. I'm not gonna remember after." But he said, "I am scared though. I'm scared it will hurt." He was terrified of pain. The doctor called and he said, "This is it, he's dying." But he did say it's gonna be, the way he's gonna die is kidney failure, which just happens to be a painless death. And I was so happy for him because I knew his one fear was that it would hurt. And I ran in, I was like, "Great news, You really gotta take a beat sometimes. There really is no age where you are ready to be without your parents. I need them all the time. I still will email them sometimes. And I know they're not online, or are they? But it just feels nice to send them an email sometimes or a text.
I've heard people say that the last thing your parents teach you is how to die.
Yeah.
What do you feel like your dad taught you?
Well, being a comedian, I've learned how to die several times. Now that I've been through this side of it, I feel like people are like, "Oh, I could never change my parents' diaper or care for them in that way." Yes, you can. You're gonna find that you can and that you're so grateful to do it. My name is Sarah Silverman, and this is my brief but spectacular take on saying goodbye.
Wow. You can watch more brief but spectacular videos on our website, pbs.org/newshour/brief. And remember, there's a lot more online, and you can always get more of our coverage in your inbox by signing up for our newsletters. That's also at pbs.org/newshour. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the NewsHour, thanks for spending part of your evening with us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by Friends of the NewsHour, including Robert S. Kaplan and Wendy J. Selden through the Raymond James Charitable Endowment Fund.
In 1995, two friends set out to make wireless coverage accessible to all. With no long-term contracts, nationwide coverage, and 100% U.S.-based customer support. Consumer Cellular. Freedom calls.
The John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.